This week, Koom in Toronto and Ian, a Canadian living in Sapporo, Japan, discuss Montreal-based press Drawn and Quarterly, and two particular books from the D&Q catalog, the 2005 book Paul Moves Out by Michel Rabagliati, or is it Rabagliati, and the latest from Jillian Tamaki, Boundless. Also, a deep dive into the past history of the Toronto comic shop, The Beguiling. First, just a reminder that you can help this podcast by making your Amazon purchases via deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon and make that your bookmark for future purchases. We'll then get a percentage of what you spend. It costs you nothing extra and helps us cover web hosting and the other costs of presenting this show every week. We really appreciate your support.
This is Koom in Toronto.
And this is Ian in Sapporo.
Excellent. And this is Deconstructing Comics. So today we're talking about D&Q. You and I have been wanting to do a podcast, or at least a discussion for a while. And you suggested Michel Rabagliati. And I'm a fan of his too. And I also agree with you that he's a little bit neglected, or at least that I think he should get a little bit more play outside of Quebec. And then I had been reading Jillian Tamaki's Boundless. So I suggested that since we'd already been talking about D&Q, that we talk about D&Q in general, maybe D&Q in the past and D&Q in the present, as a way of reflecting upon our feelings for D&Q and our appreciation for D&Q.
Yes, I'm a big D&Q fan.
So let's just start with Michel's book, Paul Moves Out.
Yeah.
And you had said you were a fan of this before, and we both reread it, and we should discuss it.
Now this book is Paul Moves Out, right?
Yeah.
And so I have almost all of the Paul series. Like I think there's one or two books I'm missing, but I have about 6 downstairs.
Okay, so of those 6, where is this in the chronology? This
is about right in the middle.
Yeah, it's the third one, right?
Because probably like 3 of a lot of them are his childhood. They're like when he was a kid and then when he was a teenager and such. And this is maybe age 20 to 23 or so.
Yeah, he's in college. He's in art college when he starts. For listeners who don't know Michel Rabagliati's work, he deals with this character Paul, which I gather is to a great extent based on his own experiences, who lives in and around Montreal. And Paul grows up and goes through various life episodes, and they're very kind of low-key moments, I guess, or arcs in Paul's life, although they're full of like family and personal relationship drama. And I thought, in some ways, it's kind of representative of the kinds of stuff D&Q was putting out about 10 years ago. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would think so. Like, I think D&Q was a lot more accessible 10 years ago.
Yeah, yeah.
I find their work is a lot more artsy these days, and
that's
some of it I really like.
That's exactly my thesis that I was reading to this. So I'm kind of glad that we kind of saw the same thing. But we should just say what Paul Moves Out is about. Let's see here. It came out in, says copyright 2005. And according to my indicia, there's 2 before this. There's Paul in the Country, and Paul Has a Summer Job. And in this one, like you said...
Yeah, and that's through D&Q, but he has the other books. I guess, the book after this is Paul Goes Fishing, and there's another one, Paul Goes to Camp.
Yeah, and at some point he moved over to Conundrum, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like you were kind of saying, this is low-key moments, right? His first books, like Paul Joins the Scouts, it kind of has like a big ending on it, and I really enjoyed the book, and like I understand why he went for it, but it wasn't really a good arc of a book.
Is that the one where somebody dies at the end? I haven't read that one.
A bunch of people die.
A bunch of people die. Wow.
Yeah, and so like I understand that's a very heavy moment for him, but it's not really led up to, and it's also not particularly handled afterwards.
Right.
It's just kind of a denouement of the book.
Right.
And so I can understand why he wrote the story, but I think when he got to Paul Moves Out, he was a lot more sophisticated. Like he was taking not drama, but just sort of human experience and translating that to the page a lot more.
Yeah.
So, like, I don't think this is a perfect book, but there's some really sophisticated parts from it, like graphically and story-wise.
I quite enjoyed this. There is death in it. We should talk a little bit just about the overall framework of what this book is about. I think the only other one I'd read was Paul Has a Summer Job, where he's a teenager and he's working in a camp for the summer, and he ends up fighting with a fellow counselor, a young woman or a girl, and then they end up falling for each other, and then it's also about dealing with the kids, and it's sort of bittersweet because it's a summer romance when you're a teenager. Now in this one, he's in art school and he's learning about things like design. He starts off in an art school, which is very kind of old-fashioned. It's just about illustration.
Yeah. Old-fashioned graphic design.
Yeah.
Doing lots of letter sets and fonts and like really detailed work.
Yeah, and then they get a new instructor who shakes things up. He's gay, and he introduces Paul and one of Paul's classmates, Lucy, and the others to new kinds of design, new movements. He even goes on a trip with them to New York, during which the instructor actually hits on Paul because they're rooming together, tries to make a move. Paul struggles with that, and then he and Lucy end up basically, getting together during the trip, and then they later move in together, and it's about their young lives. There's also is it a grandmother or a grand aunt who?
It's an aunt, and she was actually in another one of his books, if I remember correctly. And she had appeared somewhere.
Right, and then she passes away during the book. So, but there's also just little moments where they're looking after friends' kids, listening to music, going to films, watching Dynasty late night on their little TV on top of, cinder blocks in their room, painting the apartment, dealing with this crazy guy that the landlord sends over.
Vignettes.
Lots of lovely little moments.
My critique for the book is I don't think the art school stuff should have been in it.
Why is that? I found that interesting.
It just has no connection to the rest of the stuff that's going on in the book. And when he moves out with Lucy, it's a really nostalgic feeling for me because I can remember being 20-something in the city and having my space with my girlfriend and just feeling great. It's really happy times.
Oh,
and the stuff at art school has no connection to any of the other themes that come up in the book. The only connection would be, as you said, the teacher shows him a lot of cutting-edge art. And so when I noticed some of the music he heard from the art teacher, when he goes to the club and listens to music, some of the same names pop up.
Right.
But other than that, there's no big thread between those two. So I think he could have done one small book about art school, and then he could have done a little book about life moving out. But I don't understand why those are in the same book.
I think the reason that they're in the book is because it's this particular period in Paul's life. And the relationship stuff, or I should really say it's cohabitation stuff, because they don't really have a lot of drama in terms of the relationship. There's not a lot of reckoning in terms of who they are in the relationship with each other. So I find that's not really doing anything different. There's the little episodes where they deal with life, or they deal with somebody else's kids or whatever. But the art school stuff, that's not that overdone in comics. I mean, there's a little bit. I'm suddenly thinking of Klaus's Art School Confidential or other things. But this particular thing is unique to this time and place in Montreal or the suburbs of Montreal in, I forget when it is. Is it the 70s or 80s?
It's about 1980.
Yeah. So it's
like right on 1980. He said he's in art school.
Yeah. So for me, that kind of stuff is interesting, and the highlight really is when his instructor hits on him. And also his instructor is quite comfortable living that life of just disappearing and picking somebody up, and that really kind of rocks Paul's boat.
Actually, that page I made a note of. Like, the thing with the teacher hitting on him, I totally get why that's a formative experience if that happens. Not necessarily, not even being gay, just like having an authority figure treat you that way. But then the way he kind of rubs it in on him on the next day, I actually put a post-it note on that page to say, like, he really taps into a very human vulnerability of, like, friendship and attraction and jealousy and frustration. And, like, it's quite soul-searching without... The teacher's not a villain, and I think that's kind of a key point. Like,
at the same time, he has some rough edges. He's a bit of a bully. Later, Paul reflects and says, I'm very grateful that he introduced me to all these things. And once I got over that episode, we just kind of relaxed. But he's not a villain, but he's also kind of immoral in some ways, in ways that I think the majority of people would not really agree with. And then it's more, I think for me, it's Paul trying to like deal with that afterwards. Like the guy just takes off to find somebody else to sleep with. But Paul hangs out at their little dingy hotel room, looks outside the window, sees the guy walk away, and then he starts kind of struggling with himself and wondering if there's something wrong with him or whether he's been sucking up to the professor too much and leading him on. There's a little bit of a victim mentality going on there, but it's really, really interesting stuff, and it stays with me. But I want to go back to your saying that this is very accessible as a way of talking about the later D&Q stuff, which is not, perhaps. So can I get you to talk more about that? And
they've been on a course over the last decade of getting more and more kind of obtuse writers. And so did you get, I totally forgot the name of it. Is it Panther?
No.
Rex Evans.
Oh, do you mean Gary Panther?
Okay, no, Panther. There's a book called Panther they put out last year by, I think it was a Belgian artist. And it's a really beautiful book, and it's very artsy, and I really was enjoying part of it, but it's kind of like Julie Doucette in the early days. I don't know if that's the best pronunciation of her name. Mm-hmm. She was kind of the rough edge of Drawn and Quarterly 15 years ago. So her graphics are a little more challenging, because like compared to like Chester Brown and Joe Matt and Seth, they have I would say more polished.
Very clean.
And Julie Doucette's a little more punk, right?
Yeah, Julie Doucette.
So I think they have a lot more of these.
A bit more dirty.
Hmm?
Julie Doucette's is a bit more dirty, but I would just say in terms of like narrative style, it was still very much in line with those early Chris Oliveros, stable of things. Julie Doucette's diary comics were not that different from the autobiographical comics of Seth and Joe Matt. But
they were, I shouldn't say Joe Matt's accessible, because I wouldn't give him to my mom, but I found that her work had an edge to it, whereas... So
you're talking about content, you're not talking about style, you're not talking about narrative accessibility.
I think content and style. Seth's work, he was, 15 years ago, he had pages in the National Post in Toronto.
Yeah,
and I don't think Julie Doucette could get published in the National Post.
Right.
I would be very surprised.
Right.
Yeah.
No.
I just say, and anyway, I would say, though, like, what Rabagliati does is very much in tone with what that brand of Drawn and Quarterly was doing, or like those oversized anthologies they used to do.
Yeah, that was
and actually, Rabagliati first appeared in those, too.
Yeah, that's right. So that was my feeling, too. Like, there's a strong emphasis on autobiographical stuff. It's got a kind of cartoony style that's a little bit European or definitely influenced by some of the more bande dessinée kind of stuff. It's black and white for the most part, and it's about little moments. And I think that was their idea of how to push forward graphic novels. They were sort of realistic. They had a strong nod towards cartooning as an art. They were about life moments and small things, like slice of life, I guess. Maybe that's the form I'm looking for. Whereas now, you're right. I don't know that they've become more obtuse, but I think there's been a movement. Some
of it's been very obtuse.
Absolutely. And you kept the best of it more than I have.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot more crazy graphics going on.
Yeah.
And some of it I dig, and some of it I'm not crazy about, but case by case.
Well, yeah, so they're doing more kind of art books, I think. And I don't know if that's just D&Q, but you must have been aware that there's been a lot of press lately about Koyama Press.
Well, there was a Picture Box who went out of business, and Koyama, who's doing really well right now.
Yeah.
And they're all quite graphically, I don't know how to process it, because I've been out of the country so long, so this stuff just kind of came up on my radar on the last couple of years.
Right.
It's really a lot to take in.
Me too, but I might just be slow and behind the curve.
Yeah.
Which I often am, and I often read stuff after the fact, as opposed to when it initially comes out.
When I was in Toronto, I was living in Toronto for about 8 years, and I think I was in the comic shop every week looking for new stuff.
Yeah.
And that's just not my situation these days.
Where were you living when you said that the material in Paul Moves Out kind of reminds you of your episode of moving in with somebody and going to art school and all that?
Well, I was living at the Ossington Station in Toronto.
So you were in Toronto, and did you find that?
Yeah, like it was it's just having your own place and having your own space, and like you see them sleeping on food, like just a mattress on the floor.
Yeah.
And like right now, there's no kind of romance of poverty. Like I at that time I had Milk Crate bookshelves, and it was great. It was cool, and you just felt very happy with the things that you had, and you felt really happy with your life. And I'm past 40 now, and I just can't feel that comfortable that way, or my wife would get angry if I tried to have such a simple life right now. Like it's just like life changes and things get different.
I think also just physically, like you can't take that rough living as much anymore. Yeah. You appreciate things like a nice mattress or whatever the particular accoutrement.
Yeah, you accumulate things, right? And like you spend within your means. Like if you have the money, you end up using it somehow.
Yeah.
The one thing I really like in this book is, so you say in that other book, Paul goes camping. So the ending of it is kids he knew died, and that's kind of like this big punch to the gut, and that's your shock ending of sorts. And that kind of takes it out of the realm of accessibility. And I feel like the resolution of this, the last major sequence is them babysitting their friends or someone's kids, these two kids, and they find it very stressful and kind of difficult to look after them nonstop. But at the end, they're kind of like, that was kind of nice.
Yeah, they're kind of sad. So there's an absence, yeah.
Yeah, and so like you kind of see them growing to another stage of their life after the experiences they had in the book, and this is really relatable, really human stuff, and I don't think you'd find such a light touch in any comics. You wouldn't really find it in TV so much. Like it really hits at a nice epiphany for the two characters in the book.
I think that's what the sequence at the end is supposed to be. I mean, for most of it, they're on a couch and they're pretty much the same panel repeated, so it really slows down that moment. and they're kind of thinking about the absence of the kids after the kids are gone. Also, very sweet. You never get the feeling that they're resentful or that it's too trying for them to look after kids. I mean, mostly it's taking them to the park on the swings, stuff like that.
But it's, do you know what I mean? Where it's like very human stakes.
I do.
Yeah,
and I agree with you.
I wish this was exciting. I wish other websites just got so hot for this stuff and said, "Wow, like human stories," and without like crazy stuff happening. Because it's really hard to tell good stories without.
I miss it.
Like emphasizing stuff too much, you know?
I miss it. And now that I think about it, your Square comics seem to be predicated on those kinds of moments. There isn't like a strong punchline. There's usually just a snippet of conversation. So I don't know if you're influenced by this phase of Drawn and Quarterly's work, but I could see your stuff fitting very well into that.
Well, I loved Rabagliati when I found him, and like Seth was the guy who was a big influence, and he had an interview in the Comics Journal where he was talking about autobiographical comics and why he didn't like the first issue of Palookaville. And do you know that first issue? Yeah,
I like all of those issues, those early issues that I read, him and other people. I like burned in my brain. I think it was just the time in my life. So that's the one where he's like walking around as a young man, sort of in a goth kind of phase, and then these homophobic people beat him up. And still, every time I go through Wellesley Station and I walk out the exit, because there's only one exit at Wellesley Station, I think of that episode. I think of this is where those people pursued him up the stairs, and the ticket collector and the other people did nothing. They just saw it.
Well, in this interview, and he might have changed his opinion because this is 20 years ago, but he said that wasn't a good issue, and the reason why was it was just like an anecdote. Yeah. And the story didn't really add up to anything. It was just like, guess what happened to me last week, and then they told the story, right?
And it's over. It's a little bit like heavy-handed because he introduces it and ends it, and his voice comes in, a little bit too much, as opposed to just telling the story, which is heartbreaking in itself.
But that's what I do in my comics, and when I look at autobiocomics, like that's something I really look for is like, don't just tell me something that happened to you, like
show you
part some kind of feeling and then part some kind of reason for why you're telling the story other than it's a story.
Yeah.
And I really liked in his attitude and Rabagliati, and of course, when I make comics, that's what I want to do if I'm doing something autobiographical.
I just think it's very sweet stuff. Well, I guess the Seth stuff wasn't necessarily sweet, but it was tender. Maybe tender is the word that I'm looking for. And those emotions, they get to you and they're moving. It's kind of like when you see smaller indie films. They're not blockbusters. They're not about something major. They're about people going through their lives, and there's definitely like an affinity between the genre and film and the genre in. So I guess what you're saying is that people don't find that sexy and people don't find that groundbreaking enough to keep on doing that, or has it just been done?
But I mean, like everything's been done. Like people are just kind of rehearsing stuff, right? Or
rehashing,
but repeating stuff. Yeah, rehashing. That's the word. And like, it's not like this. Like, say for example, Dan Clowes, he released that book Patience this year, and like it's a thoroughly okay book. But I mean, after reading it, didn't particularly stick with me much. And like, I will read it again at some point. But like whenever he does a new book, like this is Moses coming down with the commandments, and like every website has a review of it, and like he just gets thoroughly covered. And Rabagliati, I think he gets covered in Canadian newspapers, but it's almost like an obligation of Canadian newspapers to cover Canadiana.
Because he's the Quebec guy, I think. There's also that feeling.
Yeah, and so I just wish that the guy got his dues a bit more. And now, do you remember I told you that on page 76 there's a panel that I love so much, right? And do you have the book with you?
Yeah, it's page 76. Which panel is that?
The picture of Paul at his desk drawing, and then Lucy in the background and the bird flying there.
Yeah. Sure.
And like he does this all over the place, but this panel is the best. Is he's got about 4 layers of depth in the page, but everything's still very 2D because his drawing style is very designed and flat feeling. But like the way Lucy's word balloon goes behind Paul, and the lamp is in front of him, but they all feel like they're at different planes.
Yeah, no, you're right.
Like
sure.
I love this graphical design on this thing. And you know, he studies the graphical designer, and he started comics when he was 40. So of course, like he's got this kind of concept. But it's almost like one of those kind of pinhole things. Oh, I forget the word. You know, like when you make like a shoebox and you put different things inside, and you cut a pinhole so that you can see all the layers. But
and I do know what you're talking about.
They're all flat. They're all flat at the same time. And like he's making the balloons part of the image. The balloons are not outside the image.
Right.
On top.
Right.
And
that is brilliant. Now I see it. Yes, I see why you've. Yeah, because to me that panel didn't particularly jump out, but it's great. In the bottom panel on that page 2, there's a little bit of that because when the friends show up with their kids, the surprise we're here panel overlaps the one where Lucy says, "Oh, Monique, hello," and then in the panel in between those two, the middle one, the one where Paul says which one, it kind of goes out of the frame. So there is a bit of there's a bit of playing with depth, even though he has a very flat kind of style. You're absolutely right. No, he's great with balloons. Oh my God. I'm just looking on page 57, and that's once again a very kind of Hergé kind of thing, but they've got all of the sound effects, the crack, the pow, the clang, you know, as the guy. That's really fantastic.
He he really cares about what's going on the page, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful. Yeah, it really, really does make me excited. Try page 79. 79, bottom right panel.
79. Okay.
Paul's on the spinner.
I mentioned that one to you. That was my favorite one because the way
I hadn't reread the book at the time, so that was 10 years ago in my memory. But this is a very chopped up word balloons to show how the sound is changing as they spin.
I love that. I love that, and I think that's brilliant. Yeah.
So he's a really great comic artist, and I've heard that he's retired Paul for the time being.
Oh, really? How long ago was this?
I think the story was like he got divorced, and then life changed, and he retired Paul.
Because he was at the recent TCAF, and I just assumed, I don't know that I caught him. I just assumed.
Okay, well, maybe this is just my imagination, but like I just.
No, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just was saying I assumed he was still doing Paul, and he was there, kind of pushing Paul, and.
It could be a dream. No, I that's something I thought I read somewhere looking him up, but. Like I think they had a movie made of this in French Canada, like a live action or something.
Now, there's one thing that I want to say did kind of bother me a little bit about this, and this is maybe, see, you could say it's 1980, but at the same time, he's creating this book way after 1980. There is a kind of
the
Vietnamese, the way the Vietnamese convenience store people are represented in terms of their dialogue and their speech bubbles, but also just sort of, there's a very strong colonial self-centeredness about Paul and Lucy and their whole situation, and also just I think the way Rabagliati presents them,
he actually
with the mask as well. And I'm not white, so maybe I'm more sensitive to this than you are, but
I noticed it too. But that's actually part of what he feels at the time, though. Is him and Lucy are talking about the Vietnamese people. He's like, these things happen in other countries, and we got it pretty easy in Canada. So I do think he's kind of. I think they actually acknowledge their privilege more than someone in 1980 actually would have.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But in terms of the actual feel of the book, it doesn't at all. Yeah. It's in that bubble that
No, there.
And I think
Chinese thing. I felt kind of uncomfortable with.
Well, there you go. There's another thing. And so, they do kind of talk about what happened in Vietnam and, the boat people and stuff, and they're not aware. But at the same time, they don't really identify with those people. They sort of, it's just, look, there's this thing in the news, and then they go back to kind of their bubble. If you look at the bottom of page 42, there's a cab driver, and I don't know if he's black, but I don't know. There's another thing that I don't know. It kind
he's
of
the only black person in the book.
Yeah, well, it's not just the fact that I don't care if he's the only black person.
I know, but the drawing style is quite
in a kind of blackface, I mean, there is that, and I think, I lived in Montreal, and I found it difficult. I missed Toronto and the fact that Toronto is a bit more open, and there is that thing about the French and the French colonialism that just kind of stays and it lingers. And I see it when I watch French films too, like the way they talk about people who are Arab or people who are black or just other cultures. That Orientalism or that naivete about other cultures, that sense of class is just so ingrained. It just really gets my goat up. So that's something I just found a bit difficult about it, but
it's really hard to portray. So say he has the convenience store workers are Vietnamese, or the owner is Vietnamese, and he came to Canada late, and so they do have an accent, and he's trying to show what they would speak like, and we've all known people who have had accents, but at the same time it's hard not to make it a caricature, right? And as you say, they're not full characters in the story. They're just there to kind of remind Lucy and Paul how good they have things.
Well, people are probably sick of hearing how much I love Alan Moore, but when I read his stuff and the way he uses accents and the way he uses there are actually things from other people's experiences and other people's worlds that enter, like A Small Killing is excellent for that, or various things, even going back to V for Vendetta. He'd even have Scots accents and things like that. Just things that brought in a really good ear for that sort of is missing here. I also just, unlike you, I can't really personally relate to this either in terms of the relationship or the art school stuff, but at the same time I like it. I like it. There's a tenderness and there's a sweetness and there's a love for the material that I like a lot. So I don't need to identify with it. It's just I need to feel like for example, Sass I don't think he hardly ever deals with people who are not white, especially because he tends to deal with material that's of a certain era in the 20th century and whatsoever. But at the same time, I don't feel like there's necessarily a naivete about what's going on in the world or what's going on outside the bubble of what he's depicting. He's I don't know. He's a pretty smart guy, but that
was something I don't know you. I only know you talked to you a few times before, right?
Well, this is pretty much our first sustained discussion. We've only really we did that test conversation, but mostly we've just communicated online.
Yeah, and I didn't want to presuppose anything about you, but you said that you came from a more restricted background growing up.
Yeah, we're getting off into different territory here, but this is always interesting. I grew up in England, where we were very poor, and so my access to comics was just superhero stuff that was sort of published by Marvel UK or whatever, and no, we had American comics come over too, but
I meant more of so I say I relate to it in that time of my life, right?
Right.
For example, Protestant families, and this is not a rule in the least, right? But like I know a lot of people who are in a kind of similar situation.
You have 1 minute remaining.
Want them out of the house,
Yeah.
right? So like when I was 20, my mom was like, "So do you think you're moving out next year?" And I was like, "Okay, I guess so." And like I do know some other cultures that's not so common. So like this feeling of the poor guy having his nice, simple, cheap apartment, it is very common, but you could say it's a very white experience, right? But yeah, like it's I don't know. I don't know that it's a universal experience. I think the experience of like I want to have kids one day or something is more universal. But maybe this is more personal for me.
Yeah, this is fascinating. It's too bad that the discussion is going to cut out. I'm going to get another phone card.
Coming up, our very Canadian episode continues with some deep, deep background on the people behind the Toronto comic store, The Beguiling, and a discussion of Jillian Tamaki's latest book, Boundless. As this episode is being released, I've just arrived in Portland, Oregon, the last stop on my summer trip around the U.S. I've been recording content for Deconstructing Comics for the next 3 or 4 months, and gathering some content for To the Bat Polls as well. I'm bearing the cost of my travel, but if you'd like to help defer the costs of my podcast gathering track, I'd really appreciate it if you'd support the podcast on Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics. Patrons have special access to additional video and audio files there. You can also make a one-time donation of any amount through PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com. We appreciate your support.
Are you willing to follow me on a journey and risk getting lost in a swirling maze of past ages, protected only by our red indestructible capes as we break through the final unexplored realm of the time barrier to explore the fantastic Silver Age adventures of the world's greatest hero, Superman? If so, join me each week on the Superman Fan Podcast, as together we'll follow the Man of Steel, his cousin Supergirl, and his closest friends, Perry White, Lois Lane, Jimmy Olsen, Lana Lang, Batman and Robin, and others in Superman's never-ending quest to defend truth and justice in the pages of Action Comics, Superman, World's Finest Comics, Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, and Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane. Go to the supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, available on iTunes and most other podcast aggregators. You can also follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Medium, Flipboard, and Stitcher. And after you listen, feel free to send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. And unless you request otherwise, I look forward to reading your comments on future episodes. And don't forget to wear your red indestructible cape, standard safety equipment for traveling through the time barrier.
Okay, so you were saying that for you were wondering if somebody coming from my background as somebody who's South Asian didn't have that experience that you had in common with Paul, because maybe I didn't move out and go to art school and all of that. Is that correct?
Well, I had to think about it a bit after we got off the phone as well. Is like when I moved downtown. So at the time I was working at Toys R Us, and a lot of my coworkers were children of Italian and Portuguese descent, and there was other ethnicities, but like a lot of the parents who were born in Europe didn't want their kids moving out of the house. Whereas I think, and I kind of said Protestants, but I think actually Canadians in general, like if the parents grew up in Canada, they're really happy to get their kids out of the house.
Yeah, now, my story is a little different, but you're totally right. I was watching this movie that's been getting a fair amount of press lately called The Big Sick, last night.
Yeah,
And, and it's very much about that. And I was thinking about my life and how it sometimes fits in with the paradigm of South Asian immigrants and what they want for their children, and how in many ways it doesn't. But I was just curious, where did you grow up? Because I'm pretty sure you told me you didn't grow up in Toronto, right?
No, I grew up in Ajax, which is about 40 minutes outside the city.
Yeah, so, and then you went to what was OCA at the time, now is OCAD, but that must have been a big move. But for me, I moved out when I was 17, and that was very unusual in general. I mean, now it's not that unusual because a fair number of high schoolers finish high school at 17, and whether they go to college or university, that might depend on, their moving out might depend on that, so they may move away naturally. But when we were in school, we had grade 13 in Ontario, and most people stayed until the end of grade 13, usually till about 18 years old. And so the fact that I moved out at the end of my grade 12 year was unusual. And the reason I did that was because my parents did not want me to pursue anything other than being a doctor or an engineer. They certainly wouldn't have liked the idea about me moving out on my own, but I knew that the only way to pursue my interests and to begin that, even though I didn't really know what I wanted to do, was to move out on my own. So my last year, I lived on, I rented a room in a house in Scarborough, which is where I went to high school. And then I moved to Toronto after that. And I had a very kind of atypical kind of thing. But unlike you, I don't think I had the balls to do something like art school. And I loved comics, but my life has always circled comics. It's never really been able to enter comics. And I was picking up some of that stuff, like early D&Q stuff, very early D&Q stuff. I was going to the Beguiling sporadically, but I don't know. There's a block there that just wouldn't let me. And I'd loved comics growing up. So I talked a little bit about being in England, and I had to smuggle comics into the home. That's how hostile my parents were against anything that kind of went outside the prescribed what you did as a South Asian immigrant trying to get ahead kind of thing. So I loved comics.
I had the really atypical, typical Canadian thing of make yourself happy.
Yeah.
Like a lot of baby boomer parents raised in Canada are, whatever makes you happy, that's what you got to do. And so, like, in high school, my top scores were math. Like, I was really good in math, and there was no way I was pursuing that as a career.
That's interesting.
And I just saw it as a recipe for unhappiness and depression.
Well, there was a big thing about, follow your bliss. That was Joseph Campbell kind of saying.
Yeah.
And I think that was big in the 80s, partly because the economy was pretty booming, and then there was still a kind of hangover from the 60s and that whole hippie-ish kind of thing that bled over into the 70s. But then the sobering of that came in the 90s, the crash, when the economy wasn't as good, and then there was the shift over to digital and very capitalistic kinds of forces that really made the market not so amicable to people who just wanted to do whatever they wanted to do and would kind of get by somehow. So I ended up being a writer because for me, I think that was a bit easier than the idea of like moving into comics. But I had lunch with Chester Brown the other day, and I see him like once in a blue moon, but it kind of comes up, and I always feel a bit remiss when I discuss like meeting him and Seth back in the 90s and not really following up on some of that kind of stuff. And I always feel like I have to reckon with some of those choices that I made. Do you remember when I asked you online when you talked about frequenting the Beguiling and going to San Diego with them, and I was wondering if it was the same trip that Shane had gone on, and you said you roomed with Shane.
Yeah, well, we all were in the same room. It's just Peter had lived.
Gotcha.
Peter had lived in Japan, so he was fine sleeping on the floor. But Shane and I were in the beds.
I see. That sounds like an economical kind of thing. See, like for me, the Beguiling it's so interesting. I think in some ways you and I have had some common elements, but in other ways very different. So Shane was my friend in high school, and we went to...
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It goes deeper than that. We went to a suburban high school. We made the trip down to do the comic book stores in Toronto, the Beguiling, but also there was Grey Region and the Silver Snail, and we went around like looking for issues that we didn't have. We went to conventions, the small conventions that cropped up in Toronto back then, which were quite lovely, in my opinion. But anyway, we went around, tried to get stuff. We lent stuff to each other, and I loved Shane. I mean, I loved comics, and there was a kind of an estrangement that happened, and it happened around that time of that trip, the San Diego trip, because that trip was before when they bought the Beguiling. I'm pretty sure about that.
Oh, no.
Was it afterwards?
After they bought it. It was probably 1 or 2 years after.
That's funny because
I became friends with them when Peter was the guy behind the counter every day.
But didn't Peter work at the Beguiling before he bought it?
No, but he owned the Beguiling at the point that I met him because I basically did lots of odds and ends stuff with them. Yeah,
I remember them buying it in '98 because, and the only reason I remember that is because I was working at a bookstore in '98, or am I getting that wrong? Maybe they bought it in '97.
Yeah.
When was your San Diego convention trip? Do you remember which year?
It had to be in '98 or '99.
Okay, so maybe
I remember that
maybe it was '99.
I'd actually say it's probably in '98 because I was saying before to you that this Rabagliati book reminded me of being with my girlfriend in the city in my apartment, and we broke up when I was 23, and I went to San Diego the summer after we broke up. So that should be that should be 99. I turned 24 that summer.
Okay, so we're practically the same age, pretty much, because I was born in '75.
Yes.
So okay, maybe I'm remembering that wrong, but I do remember that was sort of the trip where, a couple of things that have been grating Shane, I think, kind of finally rose up. But I think the thing that really divided us, and I don't know if Shane would agree because I haven't talked to him or seen him in ages, was that I didn't have money, and that definitely came out of an immigrant kind of status, and I was very careful about pennies and stuff, and then he had money to spend on comic books. He could go to San Diego, even though you guys were all splitting a room and what have you. And then as he bought into the Beguiling, that changed.
Stuff, right?
Say that again?
He wasn't in the Beguiling. He was a part owner, but he was doing computer tech first. Big companies.
Well, when they started out, because I was still kind of communicating with him, albeit less and more, less as close friends. But from what I understood, they were going to make a go of it. And once again, if you ask Shane, he might remember this differently. But I remember sitting down for food with him sometime in that mid to late 90s period, and him saying, Steve and whoever the other guys, they're selling the Beguiling, and Peter and I, Peter talked to me about buying it, and they need a certain amount of money. I think they needed they were asking for $8,000, and between Peter and Shane they had $6,000, and so there was this $2,000 gap. And to me, $2,000 was all of the money I had in the world. And that just hung there, pregnant in the conversation. and I expressed momentary interest, but then I pulled it back because I was like, this is crazy. Like, I don't have the confidence to do something like this, even though it sounds awesome. I don't have the confidence to do it. And the other thing was, I've never really clicked with Peter. I know, like, some people like yourself do, but I think with other people, like Peter in general, the Beguiling sort of seem, I don't know, they seem alienated, or they find them a bit cold or snooty or what have you. And so Shane was the person I knew. And so I couldn't go into this with them. And it's something, it's like the thing like not following up with my experience with Seth, like the kindness that Seth took in, you know, teaching me some stuff and spending time with me and all of that when I knocked on his door and said, I really love comics and I want to, you know, get into comics somehow. That, and not, like, I don't know, being a bit more bold at that point with the Beguiling kind of really, I don't know. I don't know if I'd have been happy doing it, but that's something that I always remember in my particular way, in that way. And then I ended up changing jobs because I was working at this awful job. I was working as a process server for a paralegal company, like, which was run by these assholes who rip people off and whatever. And so I wanted to get out of that. And then I worked at a bookstore, which was almost as bad. It was an awful bookstore, but it was around that time, and that's why I remember that being 1998, when Shane and Peter took over the Beguiling, and then Shane said, well, he's going to bring his computer expertise to it, and they're going to put a focus on selling art. And some of that stuff is still there. Like, Shane's imprint is long gone, but I remember back in those days, Shane designed the website. He uploaded the scans of the art. They, you know, and I said, what are you going to do? Like, you guys have no run a business.
I remember them getting the computer that they put in the basement, and like, I was working on a project with them as well, where we were trying to get anthology comic distributed with iMagazine in Toronto. And like, now when Shane's kind of asking for $2,000 from me, and I'm like, I
he wasn't. To be honest with me, he wasn't asking. He just put it out there.
No.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Like I understand the feeling of betting on yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I think Shane was very confident to bet on what he was doing. Like he was a very sensible guy, and I think that's part of the reason I didn't click with him, was because he was like head on his shoulders, knew what he was going to do at a very young age, and I was like, I was more of a floater.
But he was also very comfortable. Like, I remember going over to his house, and it was like, holy shit, I was living in like one room that I was renting from somebody in a house, because I only got to know him in my last year of high school. He was a year behind me. And then, you know, just on the basis of the fact that we both like comics, we were in this like creative writing class together, and we, like, the teacher would say, the comic book shop is closed, guys, because we'd just be like handing each other comics over the desks, you know, instead of like handing each other our stories or whatever to look at. And he was like one of those people who was like very comfortably middle class in Scarborough, because there was both kinds, and then there were the people who were like really not well off in Scarborough, and I was that kind. But yet comics bridged that gap. But later on, it didn't. So I remember when you guys went to San Diego, I said, would you, you know, get something signed for me? And I just assumed that he would. And he got very upset. He was like, I'm paying like thousands of dollars to go on this trip, and you're just expecting me to get something signed. And he was right. But before I'd gotten stuff signed for him, it was just a matter of course. I gave stuff to him. You know, whatever. Yeah. It was just like one of those naive childhood kind of things. Although, you know, to be fair, I was like 17, 18, you know, at the time. I wasn't really a child. But, yeah, it was one of a few episodes that just kind of, and then so when they bought the store, I said, hey, can I work for you guys? And he said, well, we're looking to, I'm really spilling a lot of dirt here, so I don't know if this is giveaway.
Yeah.
He said, well, we're looking to hire people who'll take stuff in trade, because, and I should also say they ended up buying the store for $2,000 less. So, I think they got it for $6,000. They got the stock for $6,000. They obviously didn't get the building because they were renting it from Ed Mirvish's son.
Yeah, Mirvish.
But so they got. I don't know. Maybe I'm remembering those figures wrong, but it was something really crazy. So Steve and his partner really wanted to sell and just get out of there, so they gave it to them for the money that they had anyway. And So I said, well, no, I need money because I need to survive. And so I took that other bookstore job, and then Shane said, okay, well, if we need somebody, we'll call you. And then apparently he called, but for some reason my phone, and you got to remember back in those days, I had that primitive Bell online voicemail thing, right? I don't know if you remember having that. For an extra $5 a month on top of your phone bill, you get a digital kind of thing,
So online answering machine.
Yeah, it wasn't really online because it wasn't on the internet, but it was through your phone. And apparently I didn't get the message or the messages. And then so he was kind of a little annoyed at me because he was like, I left messages saying I got some hours you can do at the store and you never got back. And I said, I honestly didn't get those messages. So for whatever reason, I don't know, that whole thing is tied up with, I don't know, a certain sense of personal. So I'm fascinated when you talk about knowing those guys. And then there's another chapter with me, which I won't talk about because it's a bit sad, years later, where, I don't know. I don't know if I was ripped off.
Well, what I would say is, Shane and I talked a dozen times, but I never had huge interactions with him.
Yeah.
And Peter, he had just bought the store, and basically one day I bought a book there, and when I bought it, he saw that the book had been bought, and he was like, who bought this book? And whoever had sold it to me pointed me out, and then he's like, wow, good job. He was very happy to see it. And he's 3 years older, so he kind of became my older brother for about 2 or 3 years.
So Peter, just on the basis of that sale, just took you under his wing.
Yeah, he was just very happy that someone bought the book that he'd wanted people to buy, because he's a curator, right? He loves comics, he loves stuff.
Yeah.
And so then after that, he would be like, yeah, this came in. I mean, he would show stuff to me, and I bought them, and I liked them, and I could talk about them, and so that was the basis of our friendship. And he's really into customers who buy stuff that he. This is another thing. Is I was thinking about with the Rabagliati thing, right?
Yeah.
Where I say, I can relate to it and I can really get with it. When people say, "Oh, you have good taste in books and you have good taste in music," you're basically saying you like things that I like, right? And so,
yes and no. I do think there's empirical basis, or there are basis for judging things. There are things I don't like, but that I have no problem admitting are accomplished or are important or what have you. But maybe I just don't. And there are things that I like that I know that are inferior works or not completely polished works. But I just like them for certain reasons. And sometimes I like them because other people don't like them as much. The Rabagliati, for example, right? I feel very warmly towards that. And we got to talk about Jillian Tamaki's book in a while, and I'll maybe go.
Well, with Peter, he and I had really simpatico tastes on a lot of things, and he introduced me to a couple keystone artists. He introduced me to Yoshihiro Tatsumi, and that's an influence which grew. I can't emphasize how much I enjoyed his stuff. And I ended up just that was my place to go, and I was there twice a week, 3 times a week, and I spent a summer sleeping in the basement there, and like it was a very good foundation time for me.
No, that's amazing, and I'm very happy you had that experience. I've always never really had that, or an intimation of that with Peter. Like, we're always cordial to each other, but it's always a little awkward too. And
yeah, I at that time I was like party guy. Like, I was going out to a lot of parties, and I think there was a certain quality to me that I was exotic to him, because he's not exactly that way.
No, he's pretty.
And
he's pretty. I don't know what the right word is.
Straight?
Yeah.
No, like and it was a really good balance. Like, we got a lot from each other at that time. So
no, I think that's amazing. I just wish I'd always just known him through Shane, and I didn't know what to make of him, because I don't know. I'm a very kind of open, expressive kind of guy. Maybe that's my immigrant side. I don't know.
Next week, go down to the Beguiling and say, "Hey, let's go out for lunch, man."
I can't do it. I can't do that. Like, you're on the other side of the world. You're reminiscing on a part of your life that was fairly positive. I'm on this side of the world reminiscing on things that, like, I'm happy to talk about them because they're meaningful to me, but at the same time they're kind of awkward and painful as well.
Yeah.
And so I got to ask you, like, I don't know what Tim's going to think of this, because this is a wild digression, but I'm all about the big digressions, because I think this is the ultimate thing about comics and art, is the way it touches your life, or the way that it kind of blends with your life. And so to me, I think that's its value. But and comics in particular, because I think it's still something that's kind of special and unique, more so than the other big arts, like visual art or film or music or whatever. But so I was having lunch with Chester, and we started talking about Shane and Peter, and I kind of gave him a version of what I just told you, and he said, "I don't think Shane's there anymore." And I said, "Yeah, he's not there. Like, I think Chester said he's not part of the Beguiling or something." And I said, "Yeah, he's not there as part of the day-to-day operations. He hasn't been for ages. They never mention him. But he's got to still be a partner, because Shane, like you said, is a sensible person. And I can't see him having given up his share of the partnership, especially as the Beguiling became more of a bigger player and a more lucrative place, because they supply all the libraries and stuff. And as a school teacher, I've seen, like, school libraries I work for go to them and get books from them.
Yeah.
I've even gone on the behest of one of my libraries down to get stuff, like, for my students, and that kind of thing. When I was teaching my continuing ed course on comics, I set it out with Peter so that my students went to the Beguiling to pick up their books, for the syllabus, right? So, I mean, I can't see Shane have given that up. And the last thing I'll say was, I'm a nostalgic person, so I really wanted to see Shane and see how he was doing and all of that. And then I was moving, and something Shane had given me, it was like an art project he'd made in high school. Like, he gave it to me when I moved when I moved to Toronto, I think, and or before that, and it's kind of cheesy, but it was like a replication of the Splash from Dark Knight Returns, but he'd done it massive, like he'd taped all of the...
I had no clue he had any creative juices in him.
Well, I think like a lot of people, we kind of copied from comics or whatever, right? Everybody did that.
No, but like I never had that inclination from him at all. Like, I thought he was a computer programmer. And
No. Shane appreciated stuff. Shane introduced me to
he
stuff.
appreciated stuff, but I thought of, like, creatively, I didn't think that was his thing.
Well, I think it's also a high school thing, right? Like, you're in high school, and then you try. Like, I remember when he was in his final year, he took that creative writing class again, and he tried to do a graphic novel instead of writing something. Like, he tried, So anyway, he did this massive thing. It would, like, fill the wall of an apartment. It was, a splash from The Dark Knight Returns, like redrawn huge on all these. And I was like, and I still had this, and I was like, he'd probably want this back, or he'd probably want it as something from his high school years. So I called Peter and I said, can you give me a phone number for him? Peter says, I have no phone number for him. And once again, this is me thinking it's Peter being weird or whatever. I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, what are you talking about? He's your partner. And then I said, well, I'm sure Shane would like it back. And what if I drop it off at the store? And Peter said, okay. I said, when's Shane going to be in next time? And Peter said, I don't know. And so I drop it off, and then I write a little card saying I'd really love to, grab a drink with you or see you again, ask how you're doing. And then so apparently Peter put both the envelope and this big picture thing in the basement. And then a year later I said, so did Shane pick it up? He said, no, it's still in the basement. So I have no idea what's happening there. I have no idea.
Well, I think it's plausible that Peter bought him out.
It's plausible, but then why wouldn't Peter have said that? Peter should. He wouldn't say.
Strange. It's I had the utmost respect for those guys.
Yeah.
So I never ever asked them any serious question about that stuff.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was someone I didn't have an interest in, I'd probably be really brash and obnoxious about asking. But those guys, I just okay, that's your business, and yeah, I never talked about it.
No, I hear you, and I wouldn't feel comfortable asking that to Peter, but Shane was my friend at one time, and I'm just curious. I think if Peter bought him out, I think Peter would have said something like, "Shane's no longer part of the." It's just the awkwardness of saying, well, I don't talk to him, or effectively saying, I don't talk to him. I don't have any contact info. He hasn't picked up the thing you dropped off in a year. That is just, I don't know. Will I ever see Shane again? I can't find him on Facebook. I can't, it's okay. It's not I'm heartbroken. I'm a little sad.
I hate to say it, but you really have to just make that step and say, how can I get in contact with him?
I did. That's what I'm saying. I did do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. With no result.
And he said he didn't know how to.
Yeah. But if he were to say that Shane's no longer a partner or whatever, or they don't talk, he wouldn't have taken the art to hold for Shane, unless he just wanted to get me out of his hair. But even then, I don't know. I wouldn't have done that in his shoes. I would have just said, I'm sorry, but I don't talk to him anymore. I don't know where he is.
But I really got to say, though, my experience with Peter, now he's busy because he's an important guy in comics these days, right? But he was never, ever difficult. He was never, ever egotistical. He was just excited about things. He was a very positive guy. So, the notion that he was being difficult, it's not I can't believe it could happen, but
I'm not even saying he was difficult. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that I've never really kind of clicked with him. I've never, and I don't know. I don't know what it is. There are people in comics who are really warm, and I think you got that side of Peter at that time in your life, and because you were picking up stuff that he was interested in, and and maybe it was also because it was a time when they were just getting going and all of that kind of stuff. But I don't know. And then they're intimately tied to D&Q as well, so that should bring us back to D&Q. Because the rise of D&Q is tied to the rise of the Beguiling. Those two go together, right?
Well, when Chris Oliveros, he came to the store, because he'd come to the store once or twice a year, and Peter showed him one of my zines that I'd done, my little mini comics, because Peter was trying, he tried to promote me and help me out.
Yeah.
And Chris Oliveros just looked at the lettering and said no. like he wouldn't even look at it because my lettering was bad.
Well, I don't know. I always thought Chris was a little awkward too. If you ask me, like, I'm not saying these guys are, whatever, difficult people or anything. Don't get me wrong. I'm just saying that I never really, I don't know, I just never really kind of, and I'm a very kind of open, expressive kind of guy. So for me, I kind of look for that too in other people. I mean, I don't think you have to be a good artist or to be a good, comics person or whatever, but it certainly helps. I think it certainly helps communities. It certainly helps if you can like make a connection, if you can,
I think even at that point in time, and this is like, 18, 19 years ago, Chris Oliveros was very much into distinguishing comics into the good comics and bad comics and stuff. And like, one of the things that always killed me as a creator is I'm exactly the same age as Adrian Tomine, right?
Yeah.
And Tomine was making good comics when he was 20. And when I was like 30, I was not making good comics.
Well, Tomine's just gifted. I mean, how many people are hitting their stride that young in life? And to be honest with you, I think his earlier stuff's better than the stuff he's doing now. I've sort of almost gone off of the more recent stuff because I was crazy about the stuff that was collected in Summer Blonde. I think is like amazing. And for me, it's, even though I no longer feel that young angst so keenly, I can still look at that stuff. And that's another thing I wonder now, because I wonder if it's just sort of a certain time and place in my life that makes me love certain graphic novels or certain comics work more than other stuff. Because I can remember that early Seth stuff. I can remember that stuff by Chester. I can remember the Joe Brown stuff. Even the little, the few issues of Dirty Plot I read, or the graphic novel I read by Julie Doucet. I can remember that, and the Tomine.
Yeah.
But now, when I read stuff, I don't remember it as well, or it doesn't make as much of an impact much of the time. Not all of the time, but much of the time. And so I don't know if it's just like, I'm less impressionable, or my memory's not so elastic anymore.
You're putting stuff on the top of the pile, right? Like, you have your essentials already decided. And it's really hard to get into that niche. And I feel the same with comics, but I feel the same with music too. Like, it's really hard to create new essentials,
Yeah. Anyway, we should talk about Jillian Tamaki and all of this.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
When I read the book, and because I talked to you about reviewing it, it made reading it a little more difficult because I kept trying to put it all in perspective.
Well, I think the discussion we're having is a good one. So we don't have to review it so much because, I mean, it is getting widely reviewed. And I'm a little uncertain of my own ability to review it, to be honest with you.
I wanted to go into it pure, and like a lot of the time with reviews, I often don't read reviews until after I've seen the thing. Like, I want to have a conversation about something as opposed to be told why to enjoy something.
Yeah.
And so I didn't look at the reviews, and actually I only finished reading it 2 days ago, so I haven't read any reviews of it since then.
Well, that's kind of good, because to be honest with you, I've only read that one real review in The Atlantic that I sent you. I do know it's been getting other press, and it's been really good press. But, I mean, I do think Jillian Tamaki is sort of part of a newer wave, or a newer and a higher kind of echelon of successful, I don't know how old she is, but let's just say younger cartoonists who are sort of at the forefront. So do you know how old she is?
I have no idea.
Yeah, and so I read Skim, Suddenly Last Summer, Super Mutant Magic Academy, and then now this. So I thought we could at least discuss the book. Have you read all of those 4 works as well?
I read the last Summer, whatever. I forget the title.
I think it's
read
Summer
that
Last Summer, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, I can't remember. I lent the book to a friend, and the friend never gave it back. So it's been kind of out of mind for a year and a half. But and the Mutant Academy stuff, I read a bunch of it coming out on Tumblr. But the summer book, like, it drove me crazy how gorgeous it was. Like, that inking is basically, like Rabagliati. I want to do what Rabagliati does because it's super clean line and it's graphically so sophisticated. But my line tends to be a lot more organic than Rabagliati's is. And Tamaki, her line is super organic. Like, she's doing brushes and she's got flow on it. And so that Last Summer, or whatever it's called, is like that book is one of the most gorgeous books I've ever seen in my life. And just for that fact, I was not so happy with this book, Boundless, because...
Well, let me just throw in my two cents there. I totally agree with you. I think in general, her art is very gifted, whether it's those penguin covers or it's this stuff from Skim, like just the darkness and the shadows that the lines bleed off into, and the confidence to not have to render faces so adroitly, and yet at the same time to have such expressive brushwork in the bodies and the sway and the motion. In Suddenly Last Summer, it's gorgeous, but also in Skim, and I think the art in the new book is fantastic, but I'm getting that you didn't like it. By the way, I looked it up. It is...
Well, it's all different. Like, the new book, when I got to the end of the book and I saw the, whatever the book notes are, and it was, well, this appeared in this magazine, this appeared in this magazine, this appeared here and here. I was like, oh, okay, so this was not a book. This is just a collection of stuff she wrote. And I was totally not surprised because there is no thread going through this book at all. Like, there's the thread of an artist who has a certain way of thinking, but this is not a book that I don't think it works as a collection in that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I have my own feelings about the book that it didn't really but for me, it's not the art. Like, the art, especially in terms of the way she crops stuff or the way she picks different styles. They're not exactly different styles, but different modes. And the balance of the text and the picture, it's all designed very well. You were talking about a sense of design earlier, and her sense of design is different than Rabagliati's, but she has design sense in spades. I mean, she's very, very gifted, and she's not like Tom and Abe, who's got a very
artsy.
Yeah, I mean, it's fantastic. I'm so sorry. It's not called Suddenly Last Summer. That's a movie. It's called This One Summer. I just looked it up.
This One Summer.
Yeah, This One Summer was her previous book with her cousin Mariko. Okay. But
this book, like a lot of the stories, I kind of feel like she's playing and she's having fun, and it's cool, but like it's one of these things where I actually would consider this a great book, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to people.
Yeah,
like I think this is a very strong work. Like, I can see a huge amount of talent and a huge amount of thought, but I wouldn't necessarily say, oh, you got to read this. Like, it's just not great in that way.
Well, just to take it back to the original idea we started off with, which is that comics, or at least indie comics, about 10 years ago, were kind of a different kind of thing, and graphic novels were the kind of thing that the Michel Rabagliati book, Paul Moves Out, is kind of representative of. And there's been a shift, or at least I feel like I see this shift that's happening or has happened to the more art book or the concept book. You know, I mean, it's like the difference between Hard Day's Night Beatles and Sgt. Pepper's Beatles, right? Or White Album Beatles. It's that kind of shift that's happening in alternative comics. And I can see why this book is getting a lot of attention because of that. But in terms of the actual story or the characters or leaving me with something, I don't know that I'm going to remember any of this stuff a couple of years from now, let alone 10 years from now. Whereas the older D&Q stuff I do remember.
There's a couple stories I'll remember in here, but I do think that there's some very strong ideas in the book, and like some of the stories that I really like. It's my issue with it is that it is kind of scattershot.
Yeah.
More than anything.
Let me ask you what was your favorite, or what did you think was the strongest story in the collection?
One dot Jenny.
That's
Facebook one.
That's maybe my second one, but
okay.
But I think the strength of that is the concept. So for listeners who probably are annoyed at our rambling, we should say what the story is about. In the story, there is it kind of reminded me of this small indie film called Another Moon, although I might be remembering the title wrong yet, once again, where there's another Earth, and things might be slightly different there, and it's kind of in view, and it reminded me of that. But basically in the Tamaki story, there is an alternative Facebook, and it has the same people as on our Facebook, but things are slightly different in their lives. And so Jenny, the protagonist of the story, has become obsessed with her alternate Jenny, and she follows Jenny as she falls into a relationship, is in love, posts photos, and is frustrated because she herself is not coupled, and she feels a little bit resentful. And then as that other Jenny goes through a breakup at the end, then she feels a little bit better, and she wonders and muses about why it happened, and the fact that she feels better about it. But yeah, go ahead. What was it about that one that stood out for you?
Well, I thought it was a strong metaphor, and it was a strong concept and a strong metaphor, and played it well. And there's this notion of when people use Facebook and use social media, they have a huge comparative problem, and it's kind of known that, even if you don't, when people post on social media, they post happy things. They don't really post they don't post about their divorce. They don't post about the failures in their life. They post the happy things. And so even if you realize that your friend's life have much more nuance than you would see on social media, you can't help but reflect on your own life in doing so. And so when you have this thing of there's an alternate version of me and they're having a different life, and the woman reflects on her own life in that way, it's a story well told, it's a concept well told, and it's just expressed well. And so I dug the story, and actually I dug a lot of the stories in here.
Well, I think it's kind of like a concept album. They're stories about concepts, and that's one of the neatest concepts in there. There's another story where this person talks about the relationships in her life and how each of the people that she's been with has been affected by this kind of cult movie. It's a made-up movie, but
the
Darla, yeah, and I, it was an interesting idea. Just like there's this one story, I don't have my book in front of me, but maybe you can tell me what it's called, where this woman just keeps on shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And Half-Life, thank you. And I love these concepts. They are great. She's got a sense of wit. She's definitely, like it says in the Atlantic Review, these are stories that kind of come out of the digital age, out of the current generation, which we're a little bit older than, because we're sort of on the tail end of the Generation X thing. But the current generation, like, they can't imagine a life without the digital component, right? Like, I mean, their lives are mediated through that. Ours are too now, because we're having this conversation, on the phone, on our smartphones. Well,
yeah, like I think we're like right on the verge of like right between Gen X and millennials. So
we are. Although we're technically at the tail end of Gen X, I think. But yeah, I know you're right.
You know what? When I was 15, I wasn't Gen X, and when I was 30, they decided I was Gen X.
Yeah,
like I remember reading the articles about Gen X, like 1972 or something, and now it's been upgraded to 1980. So whatever.
Oh, there you go.
You
I mean, even the stuff we were talking about with the Beguiling, and Shane, who's of our age, being the guy who kind of does the website, the new website, and covers that. Like, that speaks to all of that.
We are early adopters.
We're hunter gatherers that are forced to kind of live in the global village. But anyway, to go back to Tamaki's book, the thing is, though, for me, like, the characters never land. I never really believe that these are characters. Like, I feel like, they're sort of like slices that are written about them.
Kind of ciphers, don't you think?
They're ciphers, but that's not because they're meant to be ciphers, or maybe they're meant to be ciphers, but there's never like a real sense of like rounded characters, or characters I can really like sink my mind into, or that I will remember afterwards, or be affected by.
Yeah, I felt like this was like literary in quotes. Like, there was a lot of writing in here which seemed to me like it felt very old school to me, the way they were, the use of words, the story, and like say, for example, Adrian Kamine, when he has always been writing, like, he has metaphors and he has ideas in his books, but they never seem heavy-handed in any way. It always seems very, very organic, and I felt here like the concept was that the main point, and this is a really good book, and I feel so bad to give it critiques like this, but it just didn't have the same organicness. It didn't have the same smoothness to me.
Yeah, and I hear you. I mean, we may have different reasons as to why we didn't connect with it. But yeah, there's a sort of sense of kind of orbiting it without really landing. And I mean, I do think Tamine could be heavy-handed at times, not in a bad way. It's just like that angst and that pain was so present in his work. Like, you couldn't forget it. You couldn't forget. I'm not talking about the more recent stuff, but the period I really liked. I mean, it was just so articulated, and it was so fresh and painful and unpleasant. But yeah, with the Tamaki stuff, I don't know. And I don't know if this kind of current phase originates with Chris Ware. In my mind, it sort of does, because Chris Ware makes these like elaborate, art books that are just meticulous and gorgeous, and he's had such an impact on comics. But I don't really take a lot away from his work, and I don't know, it just, like, there's a heavy sense of depression and pain there, but I don't know, I'm not really affected. Like, these characters don't live with me, and I feel the same way about some
with Chris Ware, what I like most is the humor.
Yeah.
He is super depressed, and then he goes, huh? Like, he can have a laugh about it.
It's a very bitter sense of humor, but yeah. I mean, that's what I like about Tamaki the most, is her sense of humor. I don't know if you read that D&Q 25th anniversary massive tome, but she had...
Yeah, she did the
True Bunny thing?
intern story.
Yeah,
the intern story.
Yeah, her name was Kubeni, or that was the name that the intern went by. And it was just all farce. It was just all like high satire. Once again, about the digital thing, an intern who blogs while she's working for D&Q, and then she exaggerates things, and then she gets let go, but she kind of hypes it up and paints it in a particular way, and then she becomes famous and makes a lot of money, but totally loses her sense of self. And now that I'm saying this, it sounds a lot like one of the stories in Boundless, but it was a lot just funnier, and just the panels and the storytelling and the timing were very sharp, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of the aspects of Super Mutant Magic Academy that I really liked, which were like when it was really funny and sharp. You know, I thought that stuff really landed, and it stayed with me, and to me that's her forte. Like, she can be kind of acerbic and very ironic. But in terms of actually like creating characters that move me or stay with me, like the earlier D&Q stuff, it's not there. And also, it's not there in a number of like this current crop of stuff. So that's why I'm just not sure if it's my age and where I'm coming from. I'm a male in my early 40s, you know, who waxes nostalgically for things I really liked when I was younger and all of that. And I'm sure that fits me up.
It could be a little bit of like the way it hits the demographic you are, but like, let me ask you, what do you think of the art in this story, in this book?
Well, like I said before, I think she's an amazing artist, and she's constantly like rambling and trying new things out.
I think she is an amazing artist. I think half of this book looks like it was drawn on an iPad.
Well, yeah, there is that too. I can't begrudge her for that, because I think like the fact that she's keeping it fresh and that she's trying new things is kind of cool. I'm not always like, it's like for the umpteenth time, it's not staying with me necessarily, but it's kind of, and I kind of like that about Super Mutant Magic Academy too. There's a sort of unfinished sense of some of that stuff. Some people were saying, well, there's no reason to collect that in a book. There is the feeling that
I think the Magic Academy stuff looks beautiful.
No, but some of it's rough. Some of it's like
it's when she's keeping it fresh.
Yeah.
I think she is, because she's doing all these stories for a lot of different publishing ventures, or like some of them appeared in different anthology magazines.
Or like Hazlitt, for example.
She is having a good time and doing a whole bunch of different things. And what I think is that it just doesn't add up to a tome that gets a huge amount of press. And so I think if this book wasn't getting articles written all across the internet about it, I'd think, yeah, this is a pretty good book. But when it's being held up as something as, this is a great book, and I'm like, no, it doesn't really add up to what's being said about it. So that's I guess maybe the reputation of it hurts it in my eyes.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't live up to the hype, and that's. But let me ask you, just because our podcast is waxing pretty long at this point, including the earlier part. What were the last couple of D&Q books that you read that really hit you, that stayed with you?
Well, the book I mentioned to you yesterday, Panther by Brecht Evans, like, that's a punch in the stomach. Like, it's got some weird stuff going on.
Like, it was a punch that you liked.
I was loving it until it punched me. It was a really wonderful book, and then it just went in some weird places, and it basically just, it's like Where the Wild Things Are, but with child abuse.
Okay.
Like, it's a really fantastic book, and then it just, like, I don't know what it's doing at the end, and I felt very uncomfortable, and I felt kind of gross. And but it really was fantastic. And the rest of the D&Q stuff, like, you know, they do a lot of international translations. So the last, I guess it came out 3 years ago now, Shigeru Mizuki's World War II, not World War II, he has a book, Showa, which is the history of Japan from just before World War II until the 80s. And that book is just ridiculous. Like, it should be on every reading list on the planet. So that's really fantastic. Like, D&Q prints some really essential comics but I kind of get the feeling of like that book Shoah, if it was written by an English artist in English in America, they wouldn't publish it. They're not interested. Like their international translations, they like traditional cartooning, Moomin and stuff. But from American artists, they like weird artsy stuff. And it's a really strange thing of the company these days.
Yeah, I don't really know what to make of them. I'm kind of like, they produce high quality stuff, and I'm always curious to see what they're doing. But for me, I think, and once again, I read stuff after the fact because I'm always a bit behind the curve about these things. But like the stuff when not including that early generation that we were talking about, it's still older stuff. Like when I think about things that really affected me, I would say Rutu Modan's Exit Wounds. Not so much her subsequent book, The Property. It didn't have the same punch or impact, although it's visually quite beautiful because she's a very skilled, illustrator.
That's on D&Q?
They're both D&Q. The Property.
Okay. I read the Exit Wounds. I bought after the Property. Is that the book's name?
Yeah.
What's the new one? The Property?
The Property is the most recent one. Exit Wounds was the one before.
I love that. I thought that was absolutely amazing.
You thought The Property was amazing.
I thought with Rabagliati, I like the low stakes. I like the human experience. And I
do too. I just didn't feel like it hit in the same way as Exit Wounds, which just moved me.
I haven't read Exit Wounds. I bought it, and it's...
You gotta read that. I think the art grows.
I bought it, so I'm going to.
We should do.
I bought it on the strength of The Property.
Well, I like
The Property.
We should do another podcast at some point, and we should discuss both those books. I also have her collection of stories, Jamilti and Other Stories. She did a series of they're like cartoon blogs, and I can't remember if it was the New York Times or some other newspaper, but those were great too, and I think those might still be up online. And then Vanessa Davis's Make Me a Woman collection from around that.
Yeah, I haven't read that.
Same time, I really like that. But like once again, these are older things. In terms of recent stuff, I really liked Peter Bagg's Fire. It's his book about Zora Neale Hurston, but that's not typical D&Q. I think D&Q solicited it because his book on Margaret Sanger did really well. And
what a Moon Cop?
I haven't read it. I read a little bit. I read a little bit of his stuff. I don't know if it really. Once again, it moves me. It's kind of okay, but it doesn't. It's
that book. That book is a footnote of a Chris Ware book. Like Chris Ware goes all over the place, and then he does like a little digression into something, and that's Moon Cop. And so like that book was on so many top 50 lists, top 20 lists. I bought it, and I was like, if it was $6, I would have been totally happy. But it was $20, and so I was pissed off. But like that book. I haven't been angry about a book in 10 years. That was the first time I was angry. So, oh my gosh.
Well, there you go.
Go to the store and just read it on the shelf and tell me what you think, but don't buy it.
Okay. Guy Delisle's new book, which is an account of somebody he worked with who was taken hostage. That's supposed to be fantastic, but I haven't read it yet, so I'd like to read that. That's from D&Q.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. Like, I had his Pyongyang, and a friend of mine read his book about going to Israel, and that guy, he got angry about the Israel book from Delisle's point of view. But I really think he's a good artist, and he's got really good substance in his art. His writing, I don't have as many opinions on, but structurally, he's a good artist. I
like the writing more than the art, to be honest with you. The art is too monotonous in terms of his travelogue stuff. It's too simple and repetitive for me, but it's fine. I don't dislike it. Like, I'll read it. I don't know. I'm looking forward to reading the new book because it's different in terms of style and the content too. So
is the new one fiction?
No, it's about somebody he worked with who was taken hostage. You know, because he works for, or his wife works for MSF or something.
Hostage, but,
Hmm?
yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I knew roughly that it was about being stuck in a room or being hostage, but I didn't know much else other than that.
No, as far as I'm aware, it's nonfiction about somebody he knew that this happened to.
Like, you know, regardless of any criticism, they are an interesting publisher, and like, I was thinking of like the Tamaki book. I wasn't thrilled when I finished the book, and like but at the same time, I could say these are things I can talk about, and these are things they will stick with me to an extent. And like when I read, I've been reading some Image stuff because like it's like television, like it's a kind of entertainment, and Image publishes a ton of books, and whenever they do their first collection, the first collection is just $10, and so like I bought about 10 or 12 of them, and like it's all sci-fi concepts and stuff happens, and when it's done, I ate a sandwich. Like it doesn't have any sort of staying power.
I feel the same. I feel the same. Yeah. Although I'm much happier with Image now than what Image used to be, and I'm happy that that an independent, house like Image can get traction, because I think that just speaks well for the industry. But I feel the same as you. I just have to throw in, because I didn't get a chance to earlier, but the story from the Tamaki collection that made the biggest impression on me was Sex Coven, and partly it's the longest, but also I just think it's the most sustained in terms of like something that I'll remember, and the concept too, the concept of this ambient music that just works like a drug and psychedelic.
Do you listen to drone music?
No, I don't. Have you listened to music that works in the same way?
Oh yeah.
That psychedelically affects you?
Well, that's the thing is like, there's a connection between meditation, drugs, and drone music, which all is meant to get you vibrating on a higher plane. And so I like that concept, but I liked in that story some of the people who are into this drone music, they go and they start a hippie commune, right?
Yeah.
And one of the girls on it, she can't stick around in the commune because the rules are so stringent, and she goes back into society. And the end of the story is her trying to have a cigarette at a cafe, and they're like, well, you can have a cigarette on the other side of that fence because that's the mall, but you can't have it here. And so, like, she did have a point about rules are arbitrary, and everywhere you go has a rule, and you can't, if you say there's no rules, then that turns into a rule. But I didn't see the connection between that and drone music. So it was a little bit of a puzzling story, but it was an interesting story still.
Yeah. Anyway, that's the one that the one about the fly too. I think that one kind of, I don't know. I mean, they all had ideas in them. Like, they're not stories without ideas. They're just, I don't know.
Actually, you know what? Can I say though? In that book, the very first story, and I really didn't like the story, World Class City.
That's the one I like the least.
Pop song. Yeah, but the opening page is this picture of a woman, I guess a shirtless woman, with the top of her head cropped off, and when you turn the page, you can see her face. And the result of this graphically is like somebody peeking over the page. And that delighted me. I thought that was just like a graphically fantastic thing. And then the rest of the story I didn't like, but that was like I was smiling, and I was really happy to start the book with that image.
Cool. Anything else?
Do you remember the image?
Say that again, sorry.
The opening image is this woman, full-bodied, but the very top of her head is cropped off on the side of the page.
Yeah.
And then when you turn the page, you can see her face. And it was very smart, very, very smart choice.
Yeah. Like I say, like graphically, she's brilliant.
Anytime you use a page flip that integrates the graphics between two pages, like that makes me happy.
Anything else you want to say or add before we wrap up?
I think with this book, she's trying on voices, but I don't necessarily know that her voice is there. Her ideas are there, her graphics are there, but I don't know that her voice is there quite yet. And maybe I'm a jerk. I don't know what her voice is, but
and that's my frustration with it too. I mean, I don't get something I can kind of sink my fingers into, and I don't know. There's just, I think, like, to be a writer on some level, you have to sort of give yourself over. You have to open yourself, and I'm not getting that. It's representative of this sort of digital age of irony, a lot of irony without the strong feelings or the I don't want to use the word substance, because that makes it sound like it's insubstantial, which it's not. It's just...
Well, let me put it this way. Would you buy her next book?
I'd be curious to read it, but I can't say, I can't say a wholehearted yes, just, in the way that you're asking, No, I mean...
I think I would buy it, but... like Ruto Modon, the property, based on the quality of that book, I was very happy to buy Exit Wounds without reading a single review. And I think with Tamaki, I do want to see what she's doing next. So, I'll pick it up. But I'm not going to recommend this book to people.
My favorite book of hers is Super Mutant Magic Academy, and that's because she's operating on in that book in the areas in which she's strongest. Very strong sense of irony, a sense of improvisation or experimentation.
It's very light.
Very light, yeah.
Very fun.
Yeah, and I think that's where she, I don't know, she doesn't seem comfortable going deeper to me, and maybe she will. Maybe, I don't know, but that was just my feeling on. I forget again what that book's called. This One Summer, but then again too, these books have really affected people. I've seen somebody giving a paper, an academic paper on that, and really extolling the virtues of that book with their cousin Mariko about those kids, over that summer vacation. And I think their work is speaking to women, and that's very important because there's been a significant shift in terms of both women creating and appreciating
another thing I was thinking while reading it, and it's not as novel today as it was 20 years ago, but I do like seeing female characters in comics that aren't sexy. And 20 years ago, if you had a female, she was probably quite good looking, and the women in here have different body shapes and have different, there are beautiful women, but they're a variety of women, and it is that's a kind of shock these days.
Sure,
because
they're not like Lucy in the Paul Rabagliati book.
Yeah, and it feels good,
Yeah. All right, Ian, this has been a good talk, and we should do this again.
Sure. Yeah, it's maybe a little long. Yeah.
Yeah, today's has been
a
little long.
Anyone who made it to the end, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for putting up with two old geezers talking about stuff in a rambling manner. Sorry, I shouldn't count you in. One old geezer and one strapping, studly expatriate living in Japan, waxing about
20 years. Yeah.
We'd really like to know what you thought of this episode. Write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, Twitter @deconcomics, like our Facebook page, or join our Facebook discussion group. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. Last Thursday on To the Bat Polls, we discussed the somewhat disappointing end of Season 2, with Eli Wallach's turn as Mr. Freeze. Look up To the Bat Polls wherever you find your podcast, or at tothebatpolls.libsyn.com. If you're looking for some constructive feedback on your comic, send it to us and Mulele and I will critique it on our spin-off podcast, Critiquing Comics. Send it to mail@deconstructingcomics.com. We'll read at least 30 pages of it and critique it on the show. The next episode is coming this Thursday, right here in this podcast feed. Next week, the first episode from my summer trip, an interview with writer Ted Anderson, best known for his work on IDW's My Little Pony series. Till then, this is Tim, and thanks for listening to Deconstructing Comics.